The trial, which took place in 70 BC, is known to us through In Verrem, against Verres, a series of speeches written by the trial's prosecutor Marcus Tullius, known as Cicero, or chickpea, a reference to the shape of the tip of his nose. In Verrem collates Cicero's opening speech to the courts, which we know took place, along with several other speeches that were written by other speeches that were never made due to the defendant Gaius Verres absconding after the first hearing. Today, we will imagine that the trial continued. We will hear opening speeches from prosecution and defence, and arguments on 4 selected charges of the many that were brought against Verres. The judge will outline each charge in turn before you hear from our players. Wambui Hardcastle, embodying the up-and-coming lawyer and aspiring statesman Cicero, and Elise Constantina, taking the role of the experienced defence lawyer Hortensius. In a twist to the usual formal address found in court, the exchange between our players has been recast as a poetry battle. Our Cicero is written in a slam poetry style, using Cicero's own speeches as a source of text. Our Hortensius is written in a more classical blank verse style. In the absence of historical source documents, the arguments put forward are based on the thoughts of our sixth form students from schools across our region. Listen out for language and imagery that might direct you towards contemporary parallels for our final discussions. Let the play begin. All rise.
Members of the jury, and for today you are all members of the jury. Now you will have heard already that we have one foot in ancient Rome and one foot in the modern 21st century criminal justice system. But if you were a member of a jury back in ancient Rome, then you would have been a Roman senator. You would have come from a patrician family of the highest rank. As such, you would have been beneficiaries of inherited power, lineage, and usually have great wealth too. You may perhaps consider a modern equivalence with hereditary peerages, knights of the realm, public school education, university and London clubs. But for the benefit of today, you are all here and all members of our jury. Clerk, can you arraign the defendant?
Verres, you are charged with 4 separate criminal offences. Count 1, fraud, contrary to Section 1 of the Fraud Act 2006. Verres, during his governorship of Sicily, embezzled funds from the state and encouraged bribes for the release of prisoners who had been falsely charged with sedition. Count 2, theft, contrary to Section 1 of the Theft Act 1968. Verres, during his governorship of Sicily, dishonestly appropriated grain belonging to farmers of Sicily with the intention of permanently depriving them of it, contrary to Section 1 of the Theft Act 1968. Count 3, misconduct in public office, contrary to common law. Verres, being governor of Sicily, willfully and without reasonable excuse or justification offered titles and notable appointments for cash, and willfully misconducted himself to such a degree as to amount to an abuse of the public's trust in the office held by him, intending to cause loss or harm to the public interest. Count 4, conspiracy to murder, contrary to Section 1, subsection 1 of the Criminal Law Act 1977. Verres, whilst governor of Sicily, conspired with others to murder citizens of Sicily, intending that the act of murder should be carried out.
Thank you very much. Could you enter a not guilty plea on behalf of the defendant? Members of the jury, you are entrusted with an important responsibility today: to fairly and impartially evaluate the evidence presented and to determine the facts in this case based solely upon that evidence. Your duty is not to be influenced in any way by sympathy or prejudice, but to base your verdict on the law and the facts. You are the sole judges of fact, and you must apply the law as I give it to you, regardless of your personal views, regardless of your views of the defendant, and regardless about your feelings in this particular case. Now, during the trial, counsel for both the defence and the prosecution will present evidence and make arguments. Now, you must carefully consider everything that is said. You are not to conduct any independent investigation, and you are not to conduct any independent research. All of the information that you need to make your decision will come from what is presented today in this courtroom. Now, you will notice that the defendant is not present today. Please do not concern yourself with his absence. A defendant has the right to be present during their trial, but they also have the right to choose not to attend. And in this case, the defendant has voluntarily absented themselves. The trial is proceeding in their absence because the court and I, as the judge, are completely satisfied that it is fair and just to do so. Now, I will provide you with specific instructions on the law that applies to this case, and at the end of the trial, I will explain to you how you should approach your deliberations and how we will reach a verdict. But remember, your role as jury members is absolutely vital to ensuring that justice is done. And I trust that you will take your responsibilities seriously and carry them out with due diligence and care. With that said, we will now begin the trial. Please listen closely and thank you for your attention to this very important matter. Cicero, I understand that you're representing the prosecution today.
I have brought before you good, decent people. No typical criminal. Gaius Verres. Worse than a weasel. His dealings revealed here as evident evil, immoral, illegal. No matter what wheedles you hear from his brief. He's a thief beyond common, a robber with violence, killer, blasphemer. His unholy defiance of all we revere demands penance, not tolerance. When I describe his malfeasance, it's no idle grievance. There is evidence of behaviour so lewd, profanity so crude, so vast a corruption you'll stagger at the magnitude. Do not grant latitude. The law must hold true. This covenant binds us each to our neighbour in difficult times. Justice for all is a civilised seed that bears virtue as fruit when we most have the need. See how self-interest keeps his soul overthrown? For our own souls, we must see him reap what he's sown. He has murdered, and more than murdered, cruel butchery of citizens that I'll demonstrate sub judice. His hands are stained dark with innocent blood. Good people of the jury, my lord, every part of his life he's defiled. Don't stint on the verdict. He must be reviled.
Objection!
Yes, I think, Cicero, if we can maybe calm it down just a little bit, please. Members of the jury, if you can just disregard the last couple of comments from prosecution counsel.
Verres is a wealthy man, of course, and there are those whose thoughts tell them false, that these courts can be bought. But we can thwart these aspersions by our assertion now of justice. That's buttress against accusation, upholding the reputation of you and I, and the probity of our great nation. No, the defence has made preparations to drag out this trial. A political trick to stave off the truth till it's buried by allies.
Objection, my lord.
I think that's perfectly okay, actually, Hortensius, if you would just perhaps just take your seat. Thank you. You will have your time.
Yes. The grubby thumbs of power seek to push into this pie, but I, who stand to share in this court's discredit or ruin, I serve the people in pursuing Verres's undoing. This man the people condemn already for his career of dubious deeds and words. This man who crows that his wealth will leave the lines of justice blurred. Not for the first time he is seen to be corrupted, yet his dark star has risen uninterrupted. His history is as checkered as a chessboard, but yet, where his colleagues have become abhorred, his character's been ignored. He's turned his coat into a sail and sword. Condemn him as you should, and you will be seen to sit on the side of good. Respect retained, good name regained. Passing down the right verdict on a plunderer, a public pestilence, a pirate.
Thank you, Cicero. Thank you very much indeed for that. Members of the jury, there were some veiled threats towards you. I would ask you again to disregard those particular comments, and I will deal with those in my summing up. But may we now hear from the defence. Hortensius.
Good members of the jury, what you will witness here is an unfair trial, a rigged and faulty stage on which will be jiggled the puppet of advantageous outrage, a lantern show where the master of false shade is Cicero. He's heaped upon the shoulders of all of us accusations of self-service that would be directed best at his shaving mirror. Meanwhile, on noble Verres, he's laden inflammatory claims to scorch the name of one whose fall from grace, should Cicero engineer it, would lever upward our sanctimonious prosecutor to take the place he covets for himself on the ladder of power. For if Verres falls, cui bono? Why, only Cicero scrambling for his first star prosecution, eyes on the prizes that public acclaim bring, thinking he's chosen a sitting duck to pluck so he can feather his own nest in days to come. He thinks he is the man, and here cometh his hour. And what a performance! What a trooper, donning the mask and casting you as his chorus. I could tell you how he clickbaits, but you can see his foe-scandalized bombast is smokescreen. A blind for his blind ambition to hide behind.
Objection.
Cicero, I think that's perfectly okay. You had your time. You said exactly what you wanted to say. I think you should allow Hortensius a little bit of leeway. What is sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. Please move on.
According to my learned friend, this case, these accusations are to rest on the basis of rumours long since forgotten. The defendant's past alluded to so grubbily is what? That once he followed orders from a superior who was accused and acquitted. Well, that taint is over. A defamation now will not stand up to scrutiny when greater men than Cicero have seen fit since to recognise Verres with ever greater honours. Chickpea. Do you call the Senate a house of fools? Do you sully Sulla with a dunce's hat? They judged Verres to be both able and noble. Who are you but an opportunist with an axe to grind?
Thank you, Hortensius. Now, members of the jury, you've heard some colourful comments over the past few moments. Hopefully, this trial will proceed on the basis where there will not be political infighting, and we will leave behind the tit for tat around motivations and get to the meat of the charges that are levelled against Verres today. And those charges, just to remind you, and those particular criminal offences that we are dealing with today, talk about fraud, embezzled funds, committed abuses against the farmers of Sicily and taxpayers in Sicily on the collection of the Sicilian grain tithe. Now, for the benefit of those members of the jury who are unaware, the Sicilian harvests are bountiful, and Rome relies on the grain tithe of 10% in order to feed the population of Rome. Traditionally and legally capped at 10%, this is an essential need for Rome. So let's hear from the prosecution in relation to these charges.
I see, in the absence of true defence, the defence must attack me. But it was no hyperbole when I called out Verres for piracy, for, like a pirate, he has laid waste to Sicily, has pillaged her communities. I stand here today by request of their whole society, who would say with single voice, "Look what he took from me. Gold and silver from my homes. Privileges, rights, and so many things of beauty stripped that I, Sicily, stand bare before you, ready to sue. But of all the treasures he took from this land, let's focus on the gold of corn, grown by skilled hands of the farmers in whose arms we all are carried through times of famine and of need, thanks to whose efforts our families feed. For without the gilded fields of Sicily, what are we? Tradition and respect have set tithes or taxes that must be met in order to secure the social good, that both sides of the water have both income and food. Yet Verres put his thumb on the scales, tilted the balance of tithes and sales towards his purse. We know he's never been averse to fleecing his lining for his pockets, nor will he stop it until this court slams the cell door and locks it. To his agents, he gave leave to demand whatever slice of the harvest they fancied. Oh, isn't that nice? What would stop them from taking all? And more, What option for the farmer when the governor's word is law? He acted as a tyrant does, to grind his enemies to dust in the kernstone of this despotic decree. But not enough to take more than the regular tithe. He sought to build up his own stockpile and further extorted the public to buy the corn that he had already been paid to supply by Rome from the purse of empire. Thus his greed profits from every side, while the contract of government lies denied, broken wide. This is monstrosity. And what does he say to it? Just that all his career, he's been getting away with it.
Just so that we understand the accusations against the defendant, Verres ignored a long-standing tithe that was capped at 10% for the grain that was produced by the farmers. And that particular tithe was supposed to be sent from Sicily to Rome. Verres allegedly increased the amount of grain that he taxed from the farmers, and furthermore, he stockpiled grain for his own personal profit. He embezzled funds that Rome had sent to him to buy additional grain and extorted from the Sicilians money to pay for more grain. So those are the charges related to count 1 and 2. Hortensius, would you like to present your defence to those charges?
I salute my learned colleague for leaving behind him the spent and tired slanders of his opening bluster. But before we get flustered, do I need to remind him of the spectre of hunger that yet haunts our cities? Does he choose to ignore the sufferings of our citizens, the anger, the danger when famine comes calling? Surely his memory cannot be so faulty. Surely his care for society cannot be so partial. We must have grain. In your complaint, it seems you accuse a governor of governing. I don't need to tell you fine people here what times of crisis we have all lived through, these years of attack, insurrection, shortages. I shan't insult your understanding of the world by reminding you how Sicily stands at Rome's foot, like a guardian mastiff growling at all threats. You don't need for me to draw for you a map. Nor explain, if I may coin another image, how the golden harvests of this favourite isle are a lifeline ode to Rome. If Rome is beset by hunger, if our citizens cry out, what then must be done by men of power and rank? Should Verres let his fellow Romans starve when the means to levy more grain lay in his hands? When shortages bite so an empire cannot eat, decisions must be made without delay, habitual bureaucracies revised. It's efficient. It's leadership. Would you prefer inaction? Red tape or supply chains? Which will you choose?
Thank you, Hortensius. So, jury, much to ponder on already. On the one hand, you have traditions, you have agreements, and the law, and the civil balance that all of those laws actually protect. On the other, we have the obligations and difficulties of leadership. Difficulties of leadership that are tested most often and most harshly through famine and the civil unrest that it breeds. So, whilst we consider that, let us move on then to the next charge that's been levelled against the defendant, that Verres accepted bribes and sold off key roles for his staff as governor of Sicily. So much so that allegedly, and I use that word, Allegedly, he turned his private residence into a marketplace of offices. Cicero, would you like to present the prosecution's case on this?
Friends, now imagine you're gifted the right to reside in a mansion. The pomp and the pride of your nation bestows it, that you may contrive to uphold it as emblem in the public eye of your civic office, a place for the wise. Whether the door be black or the dome be white, this should not be the gold-papered nest of a self-serving magpie, dubiously beautified with loot on the sly. Nor should the home of government be flung wide to those who would trough at the pigsty of contracts and kickbacks. Favours for sale! Ooh, what a hue and cry must have ripped through and roused the ambitious for the ruler's one room to bear witness to this gross refusal of time-honoured process. No need for real skill, experience, or oversight when the lucrative system is so tender to blight. Top appointments decided well out of the light, away from arenas where these matters were seen, done in public, by vote, when they were done right. He overturned the ballot box, ignored it for a horse race between the statesmates, straight-faced setting open rates on plum posts. Utter disgrace. The toadies pay sweeteners and call it subscriptions towards building his statue. What vain valedictions. What detestable hubris. He parties with cronies in the midst of crisis. The seat of government becomes a seething marketplace. The image of this feeding frenzy should live in our heads rent-free forever. An image of his degeneracy. The spread of the rot from him to his ilk, until it festers throughout the whole body politic. For corruption unchecked can become a pandemic.
Thank you very much indeed to our prosecutor. Some of those particular images may well conjure up things in our minds from the not too distant past. Now let's call on Hortensius now to counter that particular set of allegations.
This marketplace in my fellow counsel's diatribe is merely a measure of his murky imagination. Indirectly choosing his best officers and agents, Verres did only what any governor would do, looking to who he could trust, good right hands, and if interviews were held at the centre of power, what employer travels to their applicants? Verres did only what any governor would do. The time and resources of Rome are not to be wasted on protracted procedure that cannot promise excellence. Better to swap random ballots for known operatives and serve the needs of society with all expedients. As to wild accusations of bribery, where are the receipts? Surely Cicero can understand there are lobbyists, that this is a normal part of governmental life. Gift giving is the pulse of the dance of diplomacy, whether that gift be as big as a warship or as small as a chickpea. And a gift once given cannot be policed in its use. What endures is the boon of smooth working between men of understanding and reach whose accord protects us all. Verres knows that sometimes great art is the grease to vast wheels. It is fitting to praise his betters with the gift of art, and so does Sicilian society donate to his statue. There's no wrongdoing here. There is no crime, though the prosecution froths and rants. All he demonstrates is a bumpkin ignorance of how things work. He sees guilt and innocence as intractable extremes, yet relies on biased smears. A workmanlike attempt to create something out of nothing. What a rip-off.
Thank you very much indeed to you both for stating your positions there. And once again, our jury is left with a decision to make. We have the considerations of when will a gift become a bribe? Is it automatic, or is there a value associated with it? Do you have to give so much for it to tempt somebody to do something in return? And what do we understand of power? What do we understand of the way that government works and the way that various seats of power flow? Are we convinced that there has in fact been corruption, or is it just good governance? Finally, then, we come to count 4, arguably the most serious count that is levelled against the defendant today. Crimes against the people of Sicily, the rights of Sicilians, malicious imprisonment, and execution without trial. I trust the jury, standing as they do with one foot in the present and one foot in ancient Rome, may well not have to look too far from contemporary examples for their final deliberations. But if I can ask our prosecutor, Cicero, just to present their arguments on count 4.
The contagion of corruption lays every limb of virtue low. Good people, it is to prison now that we must go, to Syracuse and the dread penitentiary used under Verres' reign, the stone quarries. For here is the hole into which all honour was cast. Here is the violation that will leave you all aghast. Into this pit of pirates, full to the brim with foreign enemies, common crimes, Verres flung true Roman citizens at his whim, crammed together like sardines in a tarnished tin. The records clearly show that they came in, but what of their release? Or trials? Don't trust his denials. Listen to the crawling of your skin. The bodies are there. It is a maw, and he fed it. He claims they died there naturally. That's a grotesque edit, and no kind of defence that we should credit. It says execution in the records. If only he'd had the wit to have read it. Yes, executed, without trial, named as spies, captured and detained by agents as cold as ice, stripped of their ships, slaves, merchandise, denied due process, and at the last crucified. All to satisfy this man's personal spite, placing rivals under suspicion of sedition to strip their rights, a chilling abuse of his position. The truth, I tell you, of this tactician's ambition. Is it not a most extraordinary rendition?
Thank you, Cicero. Very serious charges and allegations there. Hortensius, how would you defend those particular claims?
Thank you, my lord. I reply to this heinous charge of judicial murder. Heinous, that is, that the accusations even raised by my opponent here in such times of danger. How cheaply he rates the work of keeping safe so many from the threats that encircle us, the noose of traitors, rebels, spies of foreign power. their presence in our midst and in our minds, undermining the very same foundations of a society he professes to uphold like no other. Resolute, unflinching in his duty, I say it was Verres' judgments that acted to protect. In mobilizing all the powers in his hands to seek out, detain, and neutralize the threat of dissension, discontent, treachery, and treason, he held up the line against the slave rebellion. Let no army foment their revolution. Extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures, and those who disobey their state betray their state, and so their rights stand forfeit. How grateful we should be to Verres and his like, who have had the steel to do what must be done.
Hortensius, thank you very much indeed. And Cicero, thank you very much indeed for presenting your cases on these particular charges. Now, to remind the jury, we are here to look at 4 counts. We have accusations of fraud. We have accusations of abuses against Sicily's farmers, corruption by way of accepting bribery and the sale of offices, and last of all, but perhaps most seriously, that of the execution of Sicilian citizens as spies. Added to this, of course, we have the general contravention of their rights as Roman citizens as well. Now, as is the way in all trials, there is an opportunity now for each side to make a closing speech. And so I will now invite the prosecution to close their case. Cicero.
Thank you, my lord. Good people, I believe in your virtue, your inner compass. I believe in you, that you know truth and you know trust, and you know common goods, what saves us from tyranny. The law's not something for power to rise above. Extreme times are not excuse enough for expediency. The wedge's thin end leads only to the jackboot under which all necks will bend. Greed, self-interest, violence, and more, they rot this whole world to its core. In wielding his powers like a private war, Verres holds a blade to the throat of liberty for us all. Cankers call for swift excision. The health of Rome rests on your just and wise decision. Verres' guilt. Let's tear down the rotten edifice he's built.
Thank you, Cicero. And now for your closing speech.
Verres had the steel to do what must be done. So for the jury, your time of steel has now come. From the start, Cicero has held you all hostage, coerced you with the lie that your reputations are linked to a guilty verdict like 2 ends of a seesaw. To be uppermost, you must push my client down. But what have we all seen? I'll tell you what I saw. A man whose own ambitions drove him to launch a smear campaign, a political performance with this court as his stage and you, the hoodwinked audience. He treats you as if you're juvenile, naive, but does not credit the real world's exigencies. Do not gut our government, rendering them impotent. Be vigilant in your decision. Find Verres innocent.
Members of the jury, we have now reached the stage in the trial where your role becomes absolutely crucial. You've heard all of the evidence, all of the arguments from both sides, the prosecution and the defense, and it is now for you to determine the facts of the case as you see them, and whether you feel that Verres is either guilty or not guilty. Let me remind you that the defendant Verres is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty. It is for the prosecution to prove the case against the defendant beyond a reasonable doubt. If you are sure of the defendant's guilt, then you must convict. If you are not sure of the defendant's guilt, then your duty is to acquit. You are the sole judges of fact, and it is entirely your decision what evidence you accept or reject and what weight you give to each item of evidence that you have heard today. You must make your decision on what you have heard today and nothing else. It is an important role that you have, and one that I do hope that you will take seriously. Now, as I said at the start, the defendant is not here today, and the law requires that I give you some guidance on how to approach that. You must not speculate as to why the defendant is not present. You must not hold their absence against them, and you must not assume they are guilty simply because they are not here. There is no obligation for a defendant to give an account in their defence, and it is not for the defendant to prove their innocence. It is, as I have said, for the prosecution to prove that their account is true, that their account is accurate, and that their account convinces you that the defendant is guilty beyond any reasonable doubt. So it is important for you to put aside any emotion, any prejudice, or any sympathy that you might have for the defendant. Your duty is to judge this case calmly and impartially. I'm now going to give you a few moments to consider each of the counts and whether you would find the defendant guilty or not guilty on each one. And in a few moments, we will then use Roman hands, and I will explain precisely what that means in a moment, to determine whether or not Verres is innocent or guilty. So please just take a couple of minutes to maybe talk to your neighbour, maybe talk to yourself even, to determine the defendant's guilt or innocence. Thank you.
Innocent, yes? Innocent? Yes? I know. Innocent, yes? Innocent? Just checking.
Thank you very much indeed. Order, order, order in this courtroom. We are going to depart a little bit from proper criminal judicial practice, and instead of having a unanimous vote, which would normally be required until the jury has sat for at least 2 hours and 10 minutes, it is that precise. I will ask you, we'll go through each particular count, and then if you believe that Verres is innocent, I would like you to raise your arm clearly and give a signal with a thumbs up. If you feel that Verres is guilty, it is a thumbs down. So, members of the jury, let's hear each particular count in turn. Clerk of the Court.
Count 1. Fraud contrary to Section 1 of the Fraud Act 2006. Verres, during his governorship of Sicily, embezzled funds from the state and encouraged bribes for the release of prisoners who had been falsely charged with sedition.
Members of the jury, do you find the defendant Verres innocent or guilty? There is a majority verdict of guilty. Please, could that be entered on the register? Count 2, please.
Count 2. Theft contrary to Section 1 of the Theft Act 1968. Verres, during his governorship of Sicily, dishonestly appropriated grain belonging to the farmers of Sicily, with the intention of permanently depriving them of it, contrary to Section 1 of the Theft Act 1968.
So, the allegation of theft, do you, members of the jury, find Verres innocent or guilty? Would you please enter a verdict of guilty, clerk? Count 3.
Count 3. Misconduct in public office, contrary to common law. Verres, being governor of Sicily, willfully and without reasonable excuse or justification offered titles and notable appointments for cash, and willfully misconducted himself to such a degree as to amount to an abuse of the public's trust in the office held by him, intending to cause loss or harm to the public interest.
Thank you. Members of the jury, in relation to misconduct in public office, do you find the defendant Verres innocent or guilty? I think we are finding Verres guilty. And please, can we have count 4?
Count 4. Conspiracy to murder, contrary to Section 1, subsection 1 of the Criminal Law Act 1977. Verres, whilst governor of Sicily, conspired with others to murder citizens of Sicily, intending that the act of murder should be carried out.
So, members of the jury, in relation to conspiracy to murder, arguably the most serious of the crimes today, do you find the defendant Verres innocent or guilty? Verres is guilty of that crime. Members of the jury, thank you very much indeed for your diligence and your attention over the course of this particular trial. The state and country of Rome thanks you. Clerk of the court, please will you issue an arrest warrant for Verres? He has been found guilty of all 4 counts against him. We will reconvene this court in 3 weeks' time at 10 o'clock in the morning for sentence. This court is adjourned.
All rise.